Part 1, The Quiet Before the Storm. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick blanket of fog hanging over what was once the bustling city of Seattle. Streets that had teemed with life were now silent, except for the faint rustling of debris carried by a cold wind. The city had been abandoned for months, or so it seemed to the few who dared to remain. Among the scattered survivors was Jake Reynolds, a former firefighter turned reluctant leader. Jake stood at the edge of a crumbling rooftop, scanning the horizon through a cracked pair of binoculars. The world below was a dangerous place now. Zombies roamed freely, turning everything and everyone they touched into one of their own. But it wasn't just the undead that Jake had to worry about, it was the growing tension among the remaining humans. Fear, distrust, and desperation were spreading faster than the infection itself. Jake's group, a ragtag band of men and women from all walks of life, had managed to hold onto a makeshift safe zone in an old warehouse near the docks. They called it Haven, a small patch of hope in the middle of chaos. But even Haven was not immune to the creeping dread that came with every sunset. As Jake lowered the binoculars, a sharp noise caught his attention, a distant, unnatural groan echoing through the fog. His heart pounded. The groan was different today. It was louder, more aggressive. The undead were moving closer. Much closer. He rushed down the stairwell, calling out to the others. "They're coming. Get ready." Inside the warehouse, the survivors scrambled into position. Armed with makeshift weapons, from rusted pipes to carefully scavenged firearms, they prepared for the inevitable. Among them was Sarah, a skilled medic who had saved more lives than she could count, and Marcus, a sharpshooter whose steady hand was the group's best defense. No one spoke much, their eyes told the story, fear mixed with determination. Outside, the fog thickened. Shadows moved just beyond the edge of vision, like ghosts creeping closer to their prey. The groaning grew louder, the smell of decay seeping through the cracks in the warehouse walls. Suddenly, the first figure appeared, a zombie, slow but relentless. It staggered toward the warehouse door, dragging one leg. Jake raised his shotgun, the sound echoing through the silence as the creature fell. But that was just the beginning. Within minutes, dozens more appeared, a wave of the undead washing over the streets like a dark tide. The survivors fought back fiercely, each shot fired and swing landed buying precious seconds. Yet, the numbers kept growing, endless and unforgiving. Amid the chaos, Jake noticed something unusual. The zombies weren't just wandering mindlessly anymore. They seemed to be coordinated, almost hunting. How is that possible? Marcus shouted over the noise. Jake shook his head, a cold realization settling in. This was no ordinary outbreak. Something had changed. As the fight raged on, Sarah tended to the wounded, her hands steady despite the panic around her. One of the younger survivors, a boy named Eli, was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "Stay with me, Eli," Sarah urged. "We're going to get through this." But even as she spoke, another horrifying sight emerged, zombies that moved faster, smarter, more aggressive. They broke through the barricades, forcing the survivors to retreat deeper inside the warehouse. Jake slammed the heavy door shut behind him, breathing hard. The survivors huddled together, backs pressed against cold concrete walls. "We can't hold them here," Jake said grimly. "We need a plan, and fast." Suddenly, the warehouse's old radio crackled to life, static breaking the silence. A voice came through, faint but clear, "If anyone can hear this, you are not alone. This is the last broadcast from the Free States Coalition. We are gathering survivors to fight back. Head to the rendezvous point at Red Mountain. Together, we stand a chance." The message sparked a glimmer of hope. Maybe they weren't alone. Maybe this was the moment to fight back, not just survive. Jake looked at his group, the exhausted faces illuminated by the flickering light. "We're leaving at first light. We're going to Red Mountain." Outside, the groans never stopped. The endless horde waited, but so did the survivors, with a new resolve to stand together. End of Part 1. Would you like me to continue with Part 2 next? Or should I first create the full 10-part outline for your approval before writing all parts in full? Let me know. Part 2, The Journey Begins. The cold night settled heavily over the warehouse, the weight of uncertainty pressing on every survivor inside. Jake Reynolds paced the dimly lit room, his mind racing with the message they had just received. The Free States Coalition, a name whispered like a distant promise of salvation. A place where survivors could band together, fight back, and reclaim their world. Sarah, still tending to Eli's wounds, glanced up. "Do you really think it's safe? That place?" she asked quietly. Jake didn't have an answer. But hope was a powerful weapon in a world gone dark, and right now, it was all they had. At dawn, the survivors packed their belongings, scavenged food, water, weapons, and whatever they could carry. Eli, clutching a small stuffed animal that had somehow survived the apocalypse, stayed close to Sarah. Marcus checked his rifle one last time, his eyes sharp despite exhaustion. The streets outside were a haunting maze of abandoned cars, shattered glass, and the constant, distant groans of the undead. Jake led the group cautiously, every step measured and silent. As they moved through the empty city, the scale of the devastation hit them anew. Buildings once alive with laughter and noise now lay in ruins, draped in vines and ash. The world they knew was gone, replaced by this nightmare landscape. Suddenly, a faint noise, a child crying, cut through the silence. The group froze. Jake raised his hand to signal a halt. "Stay alert," he whispered. They followed the sound to a collapsed storefront. Inside, beneath a pile of debris, was a small girl, no older than 6. Her clothes were torn, eyes wide with terror. Sarah hurried forward. "It's okay, sweetie. We're here to help." The girl's name was Lily. She had been separated from her family during an earlier attack. The group welcomed her, their numbers swelling with this fragile new hope. But even as they moved on, the ever-present danger lurked. A sudden roar from a nearby alley sent the group into defensive positions. Out of the shadows lunged a group of zombies, faster, more coordinated than before. Marcus took careful shots, picking them off one by one, but the survivors had to fight hard for every step. Jake's mind raced. If the undead were evolving, the danger was multiplying. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher. The survivors took brief moments to rest in abandoned buildings, always listening for the telltale groans. Eli clung to Sarah, whispering about dreams where the dead chased him endlessly. "We'll keep you safe," she promised, though she felt the weight of those words like a stone in her chest. As the day wore on, the group encountered other survivors, some wary, others desperate. Trust was a fragile thing now. Jake learned quickly that danger wasn't just the undead, sometimes, it was the people. Near an old gas station, they met a man named Harris, a grizzled former soldier with a hardened stare and a survivalist's gear. Harris warned them of bandits and rogue survivor groups that preyed on the weak. "Dead America isn't just overrun by the undead," Harris said grimly. "There are those who've given up on humanity altogether." Jake considered the risk but knew they couldn't turn away anyone willing to fight. They needed strength, numbers, and hope. By late afternoon, the group reached the edge of the city, where the landscape began to open into thick forests leading toward the mountains. The journey to Red Mountain was far from over, and the path ahead was uncertain. Night approached fast, and the survivors made camp in the shadow of a derelict church, its steeple cracked but still standing like a silent guardian. As Jake lit a small fire, the group gathered close, sharing stories, fears, and plans. Sarah looked around the circle. "We've lost so much, but we're still here. Together." Marcus nodded. "Tomorrow, we head for Red Mountain. Together." Jake's eyes lingered on the dark tree line beyond the firelight, the groans of distant zombies a haunting lullaby. But somewhere, deep inside, a spark had been lit, a fierce determination that this would not be the end. They would stand together. They would fight. And maybe, just maybe, they would win. End of part 2. Want me to continue with part 3 now? The early morning mist clung to the trees as Jake's group prepared to leave the relative safety of the old church. The forest ahead was dense, dark, and unwelcoming, but it was the only way to reach Red Mountain, their promised beacon of hope. The survivors moved quietly, senses sharpened. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, set their nerves on edge. Jake led the way, his grip tight on his shotgun, eyes scanning constantly for any sign of movement. Sarah stayed close to Eli and Lily, her presence a comfort to the frightened children. Marcus took point behind Jake, ready to provide cover if needed. The forest seemed alive in its silence. Birds long since fled, and the usual sounds of nature were eerily absent. The only sound was the crunch of boots on dry leaves and the distant, low moan of zombies, a chilling reminder that danger lurked just beyond the trees. Suddenly, a sharp snap echoed through the forest. Jake froze. "Stay alert," he whispered, signaling the group to halt. From behind a cluster of broken branches, a figure emerged, gaunt, ragged, eyes hollow and lifeless. A zombie. Marcus raised his rifle, but before he could shoot, the zombie's groan was joined by dozens more. The forest around them exploded with movement as an undead horde poured out, faster and more aggressive than any they had seen before. The group barely had time to react. Jake fired his shotgun, the blast echoing as zombies fell, but the numbers were overwhelming. Sarah screamed as a zombie lunged toward Eli, but Marcus's quick shot saved the boy. "Fall back!" Jake shouted. The survivors ran, scrambling through thick underbrush, branches whipping their faces. The horde pursued relentlessly, their relentless groans filling the air like a death chant. As they broke through the trees, Jake spotted an old logging trail leading to a ridge. "This way. We can make a stand up there." The group climbed the steep incline, the undead close behind. Reaching the ridge, they found a narrow ledge overlooking a deep ravine, a natural barrier that might keep the zombies at bay. They hastily barricaded themselves, using fallen logs and debris, catching their breath amid the chaos. Sarah tended to minor injuries, her hands steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. Eli clung to her, shivering. "This can't keep them out forever," Marcus said, eyes never leaving the approaching horde. Jake nodded grimly. "We need to find another way through the forest, something faster, safer." Then, from the opposite ridge, a voice rang out, strong and clear. "Over here. We can help." A small group of survivors appeared, armed and ready, waving for Jake's group to join them. Jake didn't hesitate. "Follow me," he said, signaling the group. Together, they navigated a narrow footpath, weaving through thick trees and rocky terrain. The new survivors introduced themselves: Emma, a former park ranger; Carl, a mechanic with a quick wit; and Lena, a sharp-eyed hunter. "We've been tracking the horde," Emma explained as they moved swiftly. "They're getting smarter. We think something's controlling them." Jake's heart sank. The undead weren't just mindless monsters anymore, they were organized, evolving. The group pushed on, exhaustion setting in. Eli and Lily stayed close, their wide eyes reflecting the flickering light of the setting sun. As night fell, the group reached an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. It was old and falling apart, but it offered shelter. Inside, the survivors shared what little food they had and planned their next move. "We're close to Red Mountain," Jake said, tracing the route on a tattered map. "If we can make it through the forest by dawn, we might just make it." But outside, the forest whispered threats in the wind, and the groans never stopped. That night, as the group tried to rest, Sarah heard it first, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving just beyond the cabin walls. Jake grabbed his shotgun, signaling silence. From the shadows, a figure appeared, not undead, but a stranger, weary and cautious. "I'm with the coalition," the man said, lowering his hands. "We've been waiting for survivors like you." Jake's eyes narrowed. Was this help, or another danger? End of Part 3. Ready for Part 4? Part 4, The Coalition's Promise. Jake kept his shotgun trained on the man's face, every muscle in his body tense. The stranger's eyes, weary but determined, met Jake's without flinching. "I'm Thomas," the man said calmly. "I'm part of the Free States Coalition, the group you've been trying to reach." Sarah stepped forward cautiously, still holding Eli close. "How do we know you're telling the truth? How do we know this isn't a trap?" Thomas sighed, then reached inside his jacket and pulled out a worn, laminated card embossed with the Coalition's emblem, a soaring eagle clutching a torch. Jake took the card, studying it under the weak cabin light. It was real. But trust was something earned, not given. "We've been monitoring the undead movements," Thomas explained. "We've built safe zones, places where survivors can live and fight back. Red Mountain is one of our main bases." Emma, still on edge from their forest encounter, asked, "Why come to us now? Why not just send help?" Thomas shook his head. "Resources are stretched thin. The coalition can't be everywhere at once. But word of survivors making it this far is rare. We're here to offer you a choice: join us or continue to wander, always running." Jake exchanged a glance with Sarah and Marcus. The decision was obvious, but the risk remained. "All right," Jake said finally. "We'll come with you. But we need assurances. Safe passage. Food. Weapons. A real plan to fight back." Thomas nodded. "You'll get all that and more. But we leave at first light. There's no time to waste." That night, the group settled into an uneasy rest, minds spinning with hope and fear. The cabin, though small, felt safer with Thomas's presence. His stories of the coalition's successes sparked a fragile optimism. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying distant groans like a warning. Before dawn, a soft knock came at the door. Marcus opened it to reveal two coalition soldiers, their faces masked and eyes sharp. "We'll escort you," one said. "The path is dangerous." The group gathered their gear, hearts pounding with anticipation. The forest awaited, and beyond it, the promise of sanctuary. As they moved through the misty woods, Thomas led the way, sharing knowledge of hidden trails and zombie patrols. Suddenly, a chilling cry pierced the air, a warning from a scout ahead. The survivors froze as a pack of undead broke through the trees, more ferocious than before, their eyes glowing faintly red. Gunfire erupted. The coalition soldiers fought with precision, covering the survivors as they scrambled to safety. Jake fired rapidly, adrenaline surging. Eli clung to Sarah, trembling but quiet. The skirmish lasted minutes but felt like hours. When the last zombie fell, the group exhaled shakily. Thomas wiped sweat from his brow. "This is just the beginning." Finally, after hours of careful movement, the forest thinned, revealing the first signs of the coalition's outpost, a fortified compound nestled in a valley surrounded by towering mountains. Massive barricades, watchtowers, and guarded gates stood as a testament to humanity's resilience. As the survivors approached, sentries opened the gates, and a wave of relief washed over them. Inside, the compound buzzed with activity, people repairing walls, training with weapons, and sharing stories. Jake looked at the faces around him, exhausted but determined. They were no longer alone. Thomas turned to Jake. "Welcome to Red Mountain. Here, we fight back." End of Part 4. Shall I keep going with Part 5? Part 5, Red Mountain Rising. The gates of Red Mountain closed behind them with a heavy clang, a sound that echoed like a final barrier between the old world and whatever future awaited inside. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. The compound was bustling with life, survivors moving with purpose, the hum of generators, the sharp orders of commanders cutting through the air. It was a world away from the chaos outside, but danger was still etched into every corner. Thomas led the group through the main courtyard, introducing them to key members of the coalition. There was Captain Reyes, a tough, no-nonsense woman who ran security, Dr. Kim, the team's medic and scientist, and Eli's namesake, a young boy who had become a symbol of hope after surviving a brutal attack. "Welcome home," Thomas said quietly. Jake's gaze lingered on the fortified walls, tall and thick, built to withstand anything. But the question nagged at him: how long could this haven hold against an endless, relentless enemy? That evening, around a communal fire, Jake, Sarah, Marcus, and the others shared stories with fellow survivors. The mood was cautious optimism, relief mingled with the ever-present tension. Dr. Kim approached Jake, her face calm but serious. "We've been studying the undead here. They're evolving, like you said. Faster, smarter, even able to communicate in ways we don't fully understand." Jake frowned. "That means the fight's only going to get worse." "It does," she admitted. "But we're working on new defenses, traps, weapons, even experimental treatments. The coalition isn't just surviving, we're fighting back." Marcus chimed in, "I don't trust any of it until we see some real results. We need to be ready for anything." Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the compound, sending everyone into action. "Zombie breach. East perimeter." Captain Reyes's voice cut through the chaos. Jake and the others rushed toward the breach, weapons ready. They reached the eastern wall just as a wave of undead surged forward, pushing against barricades and sentries. The defenders fought fiercely, but the zombies were relentless. Jake fired into the crowd, picking off the closest attackers. Sarah helped organize the injured, while Marcus reinforced the barricades. Amid the chaos, a horrifying sight caught Jake's eye: a new kind of zombie, larger and more aggressive, breaking through with terrifying strength. "It's a juggernaut," Marcus shouted. "We need heavy weapons." Thomas called for backup, rallying the coalition fighters. Using explosives and coordinated fire, they finally managed to push the juggernaut back, but not without heavy losses. As the dust settled, Jake's group regrouped, shaken but alive. Captain Reyes approached, her expression grim. "We held the line, but this was only a test. They're getting stronger, and smarter. We need to adapt." That night, as Jake lay under a thin blanket, he thought about the world outside the walls. The endless undead, the fragile alliances, the desperate fight for survival. But inside Red Mountain, a new kind of battle was beginning, one that would test the limits of hope, courage, and humanity. And Jake knew one thing for certain: the day humans stood together against the endless zombie threat was only the beginning of a long war. End of Part 5. Let me know when you want Part 6. Part 6, Secrets Beneath the Surface. The morning sun barely pierced the gray skies over Red Mountain as Jake and Sarah joined Thomas in the makeshift command center. The room buzzed with activity, maps sprawled across tables, radios crackling, and voices murmuring plans. Thomas pointed to a cluster of red dots on the map. "These aren't random attacks. The undead are moving in coordinated waves, targeting our supply routes and weak points." Jake frowned. "You said they might be controlled? What controls a horde like this?" Dr. Kim entered quietly, holding a small vial. "We believe it's a virus, one that's mutated. There's a possibility it's being spread intentionally, perhaps by someone experimenting with the infection." The room fell silent. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "You mean, someone's causing this?" Thomas nodded grimly. "We don't know who, but we need to find out. If we can identify the source, we might stop the outbreaks. That afternoon, Jake's group volunteered for a scouting mission beyond the safe zone. The goal: to locate a suspected research facility rumored to be linked to the virus. Equipped with weapons and a few supplies, they ventured out, the forest feeling even more ominous than before. The trees cast long shadows, and every sound was a potential threat. Hours into the trek, Marcus spotted a dilapidated building partially hidden by overgrowth. "This has to be it," he said, signaling the group to approach cautiously. Inside, they found evidence of hurried evacuation, scattered papers, broken equipment, and strange markings on the walls. Sarah's flashlight revealed a sealed door marked with biohazard symbols. Jake's heart pounded. This is where they were doing experiments. As they searched further, Eli stumbled on a data drive. Thomas had warned them, every piece of information could be a clue or a trap. Back at Red Mountain, Dr. Kim analyzed the data. Her face grew pale. "This confirms it," she said. "The virus was engineered here, designed to evolve and spread faster. But something went wrong, the virus escaped containment." Jake clenched his fists. So, this apocalypse wasn't an accident. Someone unleashed hell on purpose. The news spread quickly through the compound, sparking fear and anger. Captain Reyes gathered the leaders. "We need to prepare for retaliation. Whoever did this might still be out there, watching." Jake realized the battle was no longer just about survival. It was about uncovering a deeper conspiracy, one that threatened to destroy what little remained of humanity. That night, the survivors stood watch beneath the stars, knowing the fight had entered a new, darker chapter. End of Part 6. Ready for Part 7? Part 7, Shadows in the Dark. The tension inside Red Mountain had thickened like the coming storm. Every face held a mixture of determination and doubt. Jake felt it too, a gnawing unease that the war they were fighting was far more complicated than just humans versus undead. That night, the compound was quieter than usual. The usual hum of generators and chatter dimmed to hushed conversations. Jake and Sarah walked along the barricades, their footsteps muffled by the cold concrete. "Do you think we'll ever get ahead of this?" Sarah asked softly, eyes scanning the dark forest beyond the walls. Jake shook his head. "I don't know. But we have to try. We can't let fear paralyze us." Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from the forest, distant but growing louder. "Zombies," Marcus warned, gripping his rifle tightly. But this was no ordinary attack. From the shadows, a group of figures emerged, but these weren't mindless undead. Their movements were sharp, coordinated, almost human. Thomas stepped forward, raising his hand. "Hold fire. Wait." The figures stopped, revealing themselves to be survivors, heavily armed and covered in makeshift armor. One of them, a woman with a scar across her cheek, approached. "We're the Night Watchers. We've been tracking those juggernauts you fought earlier. They're evolving, and so is the threat." Jake narrowed his eyes. "What else should we know?" The woman, who introduced herself as Mira, explained, "There's a faction out there, humans who've embraced the virus. They believe in the infection as the next step of evolution. They call themselves the New Dawn." A chill ran down Jake's spine. "You're saying we're not just fighting zombies, but people too?" Mira nodded grimly. "They've got resources, weapons, and something worse, infected humans who can think and strategize. They want to take over, not just survive." Captain Reyes came forward, eyes cold steel. "This changes everything. We need to prepare for a war on two fronts." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier than ever. As Myra's group integrated with the coalition, plans were made to strengthen defenses and launch reconnaissance missions to locate New Dawn strongholds. But trust was fragile. That night, under the cover of darkness, a chilling discovery shook Red Mountain: sabotage. A fuel depot had been set on fire, flames licking hungrily toward ammunition stores. Jake, Thomas, and Marcus raced to contain the blaze, working with frantic survivors to douse the flames. The fire was stopped just in time, but the message was clear: enemies lurked within. "Someone here is working against us," Thomas growled. "We're not safe, not even inside these walls." Sarah gripped Jake's arm. "How do we know who to trust?" Jake looked out over the compound, its walls scarred but standing. "We don't. But we have to stay united. Because if we don't, we lose everything." The night settled again, colder and darker. The fight for dead America was no longer just about survival, it was about holding on to humanity itself. End of Part 7. Let me know when you want Part 8. Part 8, The New Dawn's Gambit. The fire's glow had barely faded from the walls of Red Mountain when the next threat made itself known, not from the undead, but from the shadows of human ambition. Mira gathered the leaders in the command center, her face etched with grim determination. The New Dawn isn't just a faction, they're an army. Their strategy is simple: weaken our defenses, turn survivors against each other, and expand their control. Jake listened closely. "How close are they?" "Closer than we want," Mira replied. "Their scouts have been spotted less than 10 miles from here. They're gathering strength, preparing for a major strike." Captain Reyes slammed her fist on the table. "We need to hit them first. A preemptive strike to disrupt their plans." Thomas weighed in: "We can't just throw men at them blindly. We need intelligence, know their numbers, weapons, and weaknesses." Jake spoke up: "We have the data from that research facility. Maybe there's something there we can use." Dr. Kim nodded. "We're working on experimental weapons that might give us an edge, but it's risky. They're untested." The council reached a decision: a small, elite team would infiltrate New Dawn territory to gather intel and sabotage their operations. Jake volunteered without hesitation. Sarah grabbed his arm. "Be careful. We can't lose you." Jake met her gaze, steady but resolute. "We'll all have to be careful. This is just the beginning." Under the cover of night, Jake, Mira, Marcus, and 2 others slipped past the compound's defenses, heading into the unknown. The landscape outside was a nightmare: abandoned towns overrun by the dead, streets littered with wreckage, and the eerie silence of a world gone wrong. They moved swiftly, avoiding patrols and traps. Days passed with tense moments, whispered plans, and constant vigilance. Finally, they reached a heavily fortified compound, New Dawn's stronghold. Peering through the darkness, Jake counted armed guards, sentries watching for threats. Inside, he glimpsed laboratories eerily similar to the one at the research facility, but more advanced, more twisted. They discovered chilling evidence: experiments on infected humans to enhance their cognitive abilities, weapons designed to spread the virus faster, and propaganda videos recruiting survivors to New Dawn's cause. "It's worse than we thought," Marcus whispered. Myra's voice was hard. "We can't let this stand." The team planted explosives at key points, ready to destroy the facility once they escaped. But as they slipped away, alarms blared. They'd been discovered. Gunfire erupted, forcing them into a desperate fight through narrow corridors and outside into the open. Jake's heart pounded as they fought for every inch, dodging bullets and swarming undead that the New Dawn had unleashed as guards. Marcus fell, wounded but alive, dragging himself to safety with Jake's help. They raced back through the wilderness, explosions shaking the night behind them. Breathless, battered, but victorious, they returned to Red Mountain with vital intelligence and a clear message: the New Dawn was a threat that could not be ignored. Back inside the compound, the mood shifted. The survivors weren't just fighting to survive anymore, they were fighting to reclaim their world. Jake looked at the faces around him, weary but unbroken. The endless zombie threat was only part of the battle. The real war was just beginning. End of Part 8. Would you like me to continue with Part 9 now? Part 9, Betrayal Among Us. The dawn broke pale and cold over Red Mountain, but inside the walls, the air was heavy with suspicion. After the raid on the New Dawn stronghold, the coalition worked tirelessly to fortify defenses and prepare for the inevitable retaliation. Yet, the wounds ran deeper than anyone dared admit. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked not only outside but within their ranks. Captain Reyes called an emergency meeting. "We have a leak. Someone is feeding information to the New Dawn." A collective gasp spread through the room. Accusations hung in the air like poison. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "How did you find out?" Reyes held up a small device. "Intercepted transmissions. Someone inside Red Mountain is a traitor." Jake's mind raced. Trust was the foundation of their survival, and now it was crumbling. Sarah took his hand tightly. "We need to find the traitor before it's too late." Over the next days, paranoia took root. Leaders questioned allies, and friends watched each other with wary eyes. Jake, Mira, and Thomas led a covert investigation, combing through communications and monitoring movements. Late one night, Jake discovered something unsettling: a secret meeting between a trusted supply officer and a shadowy figure outside the compound. He alerted Captain Reyes. The next day, under the cover of dawn, a small team confronted the officer. Faced with undeniable evidence, the man confessed. "They promised safety, a new order, but it's all lies." Myra's voice was cold. "You betrayed us all." The officer's eyes were hollow. "The New Dawn isn't just a threat. They're the future." The betrayal shook Red Mountain to its core. Yet, even as they dealt with the traitor, the undead surged closer, driven by an unseen force. Jake realized the stakes had never been higher. They were caught in a deadly game where enemies wore human faces and monsters roamed freely. Determined to unite the fractured survivors, Jake rallied the coalition. "We can't afford to fall apart. Our strength is in standing together, for every life, for every hope that remains." The walls echoed with agreement. But outside, the night grew darker, and the endless threat loomed larger than ever. End of Part 9. Let me know if you want Part 10, the final part. Part 10, The Last Stand for Humanity. The night was unnervingly silent as the survivors of Red Mountain prepared for what might be their final battle. The New Dawn's forces were gathering beyond the horizon, and the undead horde pressed relentlessly against the outer defenses. Jake stood atop the barricade, scanning the distant tree line, where shadows shifted unnaturally. Beside him, Sarah's hand found his, steadying, grounding. "This is it," Jake said quietly. "Everything we've fought for comes down to what happens in the next few hours." Inside the command center, Captain Reyes coordinated every detail. Plans were laid out, traps set, weapons distributed, fallback points designated. It wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future of humanity. Mira gathered her night watchers for one last briefing. "The New Dawn believes they can break us by fear and division. But tonight, we show them the strength of those who refuse to surrender." The gates of Red Mountain creaked under the strain as the first wave crashed against them, a terrifying blend of undead and infected humans, fierce and unyielding. The battle erupted in chaos and fire. Gunshots echoed, screams pierced the night, and the ground trembled beneath relentless assault. Jake moved through the fray like a storm, fighting side by side with Marcus, Mira, and Sarah. Every fallen comrade was a blow, but each victory rekindled their determination. As the hours dragged on, the defenders began to turn the tide. The New Dawn's forces, though fierce, were not prepared for the unity and courage of the coalition. Then, amid the battle, a sudden explosion rocked the enemy ranks. Dr. Kim's experimental weapon had been deployed, a pulse that disrupted the infected's ability to coordinate, sending the horde into disarray. Seizing the moment, Jake led a charge through the breached gates, pushing deep into New Dawn territory. The enemy's leader, a figure cloaked in darkness and venomous rhetoric, confronted him. "You cannot stop evolution," the leader sneered. "This world belongs to the infected now." Jake stood firm. "Not while we still stand. Humanity will fight, and we will survive." Their clash was brutal and desperate, but Jake's resolve carried him through. With a final strike, he brought down the leader, breaking the enemy's will. Outside, the remaining New Dawn forces scattered or surrendered. As dawn broke, the survivors of Red Mountain stood bloodied but unbroken. The endless zombie threat was not over, but for the first time, humanity had turned the tide. Jake looked around at his friends, his family in this shattered world. "We survived because we stood together. Because we never gave up hope." Sarah smiled through tears. "This is just the beginning of rebuilding." The sun rose over dead America, a new day, a new chance. And together, they would face whatever came next. End of Part 10. If you want, I can help with anything else, summaries, titles, or even photo prompts for your YouTube audiobook.